financial support. Our organization had concerns about paying an hourly rate for community service that is below minimum wage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Spivak.
Today we have the Ethics Committee going on, and there's much to say about what's going on, and it's obviously the ethics about Trudeau, Morneau, and the family of the Wee thing. Now, this committee has met several times. There's 4 members that brought up this committee meeting, and it's kind of being stonewalled right now. So here's the members of the committee. Now, the vice chair has been talking for 45 minutes.
Mr. Angus.
Thank you, and I don't want to be difficult, and certainly when I was told to follow the forms when I was in school, I was in the nun's office continually for not. But as a practical...
Is the member's word and not mine. I used the word scandal.
Scandal, okay. Well, I'd still like to understand if that's a parliamentary language or not for this committee.
Thank you, Ms. Shanahan. Noted.
Chair, did you want the clerk and yourself to make a ruling on if this $900 million scandal is in fact a scandal? Did we want the chair to rule on that, ma'am?
Katie Telford as chief of staff, who should have been looking after her prime minister and putting some kind of big ethical mitts around him so he didn't keep putting his finger in the conflict of interest socket. That's what I'm interested in.
To be awarded this arrangement, this contract, without competition. If we want to decide on common language other than calling it sole source, I'm not. If that's an impediment to us getting facts and transparency, I'm happy to engage in that conversation. But it is what it is, and we heard yesterday that no competition was engaged on this. We also know that for July 2nd, 2017, in one of many sole-sourced arrangements with We Charity, there was a more than $1 million contract between the Government of Canada and We Charity that saw Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his mother, Margaret, on the lawn of Parliament Hill. Documents related to whether or not Miss Margaret Trudeau was paid her approximately $11,000 speaking fee for that effort have not been released by PMO, and they have not been forthcoming from We Charity. That's a problem. It's a problem when taxpayer dollars are going out of their hand and then into the hand of the mother of a public office holder, the head of our government. Any reasonable person would see that that's inappropriate. This organization, We Charity, has declined to pay speaking fees to other people with exceptional reputations and perspective in the fields that Miss Margaret Trudeau is also known to be an expert in or well known for.
Okay, like I said, this woman's been talking for 45 minutes stonewalling, and for some reason the chair is allowing this to go on. And now, are they going to add time to it? Because this is only a 3-hour committee. So an hour's going to get wasted on nothing. Watch
Point
this.
of order?
Yes, Mr. Angus.
I guess it's that we're being told by the government what our committee's allowed to study when the mandate clearly allows us the initiative to deal with issues of conflict of interest. And that is a long-standing tradition. So I guess I find it a little offensive that I'm being told by the government what we're allowed to study when it's within the mandate. So if the government is going to tell us that they're just going to rag the puck for 3 hours and not allow us to vote, why don't they just tell us they're going to talk this out, and then we can, go on our phones or do other things. So, but rather than interfere with our work
Is that
by telling us that, as the government, that we are not allowed to study what is within the purview of the conflict of interest and ethics codes, I find that personally offensive. So I'd rather her just tell us clearly, are you going to talk the clock out so we can't get to a vote?
Mr. Angus, I'm sorry, I don't believe that's a point of order. Thank you.
With the Liberals playing like this, the way I see it is that all opposition parties need to gather together and work because the Stonewall. They did it before, and they're going to do it with a conservative help.
Mr. Angus, who said that just because this person If I need to say the name, I will, but I really would rather not. Drags his political enemies before our committee and drags their dirty laundry out.
Ms. Shanahan.
Point of order.
Mr. Angus.
I find it bizarre that I am being quoted when I don't know who I'm being speaking about. So if she's willing to name me, then she should just tell the story.
Okay.
It seems otherwise bizarre that I'm being dragged into
Dean
her
Del Mastro.
conversation. Oh, well, Dean Del Mastro, well, then that's fair.
Okay.
Continue. A timely reminder of past incidents. So I will just say two things. One is it is definitely within the purview of our committee to investigate ethical breaches within public office holders. But to my colleague's statement, it is also a very important obligation within our committee that we handle these matters in a manner that is respectful and that is not dragging other people in. And so when Mr. Andrews, the former Liberal, was going after Dean Del Mastro, and I fought Dean Del Mastro every single day that he was here, I said that we had to have a proper process. And that's very important because we are not a kangaroo court here. I think the issue of the Trudeau family being involved, we have to be very careful of, because Madame Trudeau, Sophie Gregoire, has done a lot of really very impressive things. I have no interest in bringing her in any way into this story. Margaret Trudeau has inspired many people by her incredible work as a public spokesperson. I think it is a very terrible situation that we are even having to discuss Margaret Trudeau. Why this issue matters is about we and the relationship to the Trudeau government, because what we learned, and I was very surprised to learn this, that we began to hire members of the Trudeau family after Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister. And then we learned that other key people who, for example, Julie Black, an incredible public figure, was not paid. Theo Fleury wasn't paid. So it raises the question whether or not there was attempt to buy political influence. That, to me, is the issue before us. I think if the Liberals are concerned about how we have documents on members of the Trudeau family, I share that concern. I don't know that we're here to go after Justin's brother, who is a filmmaker. If he's a spokesperson for we and he got paid by them, he probably thought they were paying him because of his incredible skill as a filmmaker. That may be why he signed up. Our issue is whether or not there was an attempt to buy the influence of the government, because the financial interests of the Trudeau family and we have become very convoluted and very connected. So that's what we need to clarify. We know that the Conflict of Interest Commissioner has launched this investigation because of those convoluted ties, as well as the convoluted ties. Now we learn more and more about Bill Morneau's ties with we. So that is of interest. I have no interest in what Bill Morneau's children do with we, if they're paid, whatever. It's the issue of recusal. It's the issue of buying influence. That's the focus that we have to deal with, which is separate from Finance Committee. It's separate from government operations. It's about the obligations of public office holders. And it's about the obligations that we established when our committee first began to review the Conflict of Interest Act, and when we're called upon to review it, same as with the Lobbying Act, is to make sure that it applies to everyone in a manner that is fair. That is the role of our committee. So when we had the first finding of guilt to the Prime Minister, we would have expected that measures would have been put in place in the Prime Minister's office to protect the Prime Minister and prevent conflict of interest from happening a second time. That didn't happen. The SNC-Lavalin case was very shocking because it cost the Prime Minister his Chief of Staff, Jerry Butts, and it cost the Clerk of the Privy Council, something that has never, ever happened before. And the Clerk of the Privy Council is someone that we all look to as being the independent, nonpartisan voice of the civil service, advising the Prime Minister to make sure he follows the rules. And that didn't happen. So when we end up in a situation in the middle of a pandemic where $900 million is awarded to a group that has deep ties to the Trudeau family, the obvious question is, why did that not raise flags in the Prime Minister's office? I think we need to hear, and again, I will not support in any way bringing Trudeau family members before our committee, because that's not the issue. What we need to hear from is Katie Telford, Chief of Staff. Why is it that there were no checks and balances? This is not difficult stuff to figure out about the obligations to recuse. Why did Bill Morneau not recuse himself? And not just because of his family direct ties, financial ties, but Bill Morneau has been very involved with we as well. And then we learned from finance, and again, finance is a separate committee, but we learned that there was a proposal circulating before the Prime Minister made his announcement that set the stage for we getting this contract. And that report, or that proposal was within the Prime Minister's office, apparently with PCO. It was in finance with Bill Morneau. So the connection, again, we go back to not just the refusal to recuse, but whether or not we was given the inside track of a massive program that was supposed to be doled out in a pandemic to help university students. If that was the case, then that was severe interference in the workings of government, and major questions have to be asked. So we are looking at that, we being the committee, not we the organization, just to clarify there, that our obligation as the ethics committee is to make sure we have the appropriate checks and balances, as my colleague says. Obviously, the appropriate checks and balances were not in place because this scandal should never have happened. It should never have happened in a pandemic of extreme economic uncertainty, that a decision would be made to award money so easily to people who were so connected to the Prime Minister's family, where there were clear financial interests going back and forth. That is an embarrassment to all of us. And I think it also is an insult to the work that all of us did across party lines when we were asked at the beginning of the pandemic to reach out to every organization into our region to identify young people, to identify young placements where we could hire people through Canada Summer Jobs, where so much work was done. And I know across party lines, we stepped up, the civil service stepped up. We identified, in my region, we would have had hundreds of placements. We had all the medical students from Northern Ontario, we were identifying placements for them. We were identifying farm organizations who wanted to hire the ag students coming home. We had law firms calling us because they were being told. They told us Liberal MPs were saying it's going to come through Canada Summer Jobs. And all that got sidelined. And suddenly this proposal came through. This proposal that was announced by the Prime Minister just after we began circulating their proposal, which I admit was different, but it's very similar in terms of what it was to be. So our focus here is not what happened in terms of the other contracts. Our interest here is whether or not there was political influence that was attempted to be bought through the hiring of people close to the Prime Minister, whether the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister's refusal to recuse themselves put themselves in a conflict of interest and put a decision at risk, which has now been a huge embarrassment. And I say this across party lines. In the middle of a pandemic, I've been very proud of the work we've done. I've been proud of being able to stand up for government programs that we worked on and said that we helped change and we improved it, whether it's a small business, whether it was the CERB, the emergency $2,000 a month, that I could say to people in our riding across party lines, we've been working together. But I cannot justify this $900 million deal that may not even be legal, paying students well below minimum wage, that the more we learned about it, the more we learned that we did not have the capacity to do it. And I cannot stand idly by as a committee member when the questions are being raised about the financial links with the family. So if the Liberals want to put a motion about how we discuss this so that we are not bringing the Trudeau family and embarrassing them for their work that they do on the sidelines, but the Prime Minister should have known that because of those financial links, that this would have put him in a conflict. This is the Prime Minister's responsibility. I would like to see the Liberals say to us, okay, here's a deal. We will bring the Prime Minister to this committee and he will speak as to why he didn't think it was a problem that his family was being paid and that he was awarding this out. It's the Prime Minister's responsibility that I'm interested in. It's Bill Morneau's responsibility that I'm interested in. It's Katie Telford as Chief of Staff, who should have been looking after her Prime Minister and putting some kind of big ethical mitts around him so he didn't keep putting his finger in the conflict of interest socket. That's what I'm interested in. But I'm not interested in our committee being used to go after the individual members of the Trudeau family. And I agree that we can put in a limit on how that's done. We can talk about that, but I would like the Liberals to tell us that they're going to have that Prime Minister sit here and explain why he put his family in that position.
Allowed to do directly.
As someone with many years of experience of filibustering, and I've been called out by the chair many times, if one is going to filibuster and rag the puck till 2 o'clock, which they're right, they have to be introducing new material. But if they're just repeating what the other members have read into the record, they're actually just trying to walk the clock down. So I would ask my colleague to, I love the stuff about ancient Athens. If he wants to talk about Sparta, he can talk about other things as long as he brings the relevance. But to refer to the same things that Ms. Shannon has already spoken about is dilatory. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. Mr. Fergus, please.
And of course of other ministries to be present here. But I did want to remind members of this committee in my early learnings, under our conflict of interest, it is very clear. So despite the very liberal definitions of conflict of interest, I thought it'd be important for this committee to add the following contribution: that family members, relatives, are included 7 times in the Conflict of Interest Act, and that the following are the members of a public office holder's family for the purpose of his act: his spouse or her spouse or common law partner, and his dependent or dependent children and dependent children of his or her spouse or common law partner. Again, no interest in bringing any of those people before the committee. But relatives are persons who are related to a public office holder by birth, by marriage, by common law partnership, adoption, or affinity of the public office holder's relatives for the purpose of the act, unless the commissioner determines otherwise. And I'll go further to state later on in Part 1 of the Conflict of Interest Rules that for the purpose of this act, a public office holder is in conflict of interest when he or she exercises an official power, duty, or function that provides an opportunity to further his private interests or those of his or her relatives or friends, neighbors, to improperly further any person's private interests. I think that's a very germane and important point. That we also look at influence under Section 9. No public office holder shall use his or her position as a public office holder to speak to...
Mr. Green, just one moment, please. Mr. Fergus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Point of order. I'm just wondering if the member can... I might have misheard. Did he say that that definition of family and what would be determined as being germane would be done by the commissioner?
It's as it's related to the act. Yeah. So for the purpose of this committee, what I would suggest through you, Madam Chair, is that one of the classic, speaking of Latin, one of the classic rhetorical fallacies is that of the modal scope fallacy, where you narrow the terms to such a place where you can't, you can't help but further your side. So I'm looking to define these terms in a way that doesn't mislead the public. So that the public, we've heard witch hunt, we've heard circus or show. And what I'm concerned about is that if there's a show to be had, it's one of contortion, wherein we're not actually sticking to the act. And so I just want to, for the purpose, again, because people are tuning in, this is broadcast live, and I want to make sure that they have a clear understanding of what influence looks like under subsection 9, that no public office holder shall use his or her position as a public office holder to seek to influence a decision of another person so as to further the public office holder's private interests, or those of the public office holder's relatives as defined by the act, or their friends to improperly further another person's private interests. So the influence, I think, is an important consideration, given that these are not conversations of backbenchers, of regular members of parliament, but of cabinet and of the highest echelons of power and privilege in this country. The other thing that I want to just draw our attention to, because I did as a new MP, and I see some of my other colleagues who are new, we went through the whole process of the conflict of information, the reporting processes, right? Where you had to declare. It was a very fulsome discussion. And one of the things that they taught us on was on gifts, quite frankly. And I get very caught up in some of the what I'll call political weasel words, and I'm not saying that in a pejorative way, but that's a term that's generally accepted to slip and slide around definitions, around what a contract is or a contribution agreement, around what an honorarium is. And I think we can generally agree on the fact, Madam Chair.
Chair, weasel words?
Madam Shanahan.
Yes, is that parliamentary language?
There's a whole book on it, actually.
I don't believe that the term was used in reference to an individual. It was used in reference to words, so I'm going to allow it. Go ahead, Mr. Green.
I'm very careful so as not to overstay my very early welcome here in this committee, and I do appreciate the sensitivities around it. As I have the most illuminating, lectures on the segments of the mandate of this committee, as well as the Act. But I do want to draw attention to, what I recall to be a very clear, what was determined to be a material gift. And if I'm recalling, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Chair, but I believe the materiality of that was $200. And so when we talk about honorariums, when we talk about conflict of interest, when we talk about the Conflicts Act's definition on relatives, when we look at Section 4, Section 9.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Mr.
Point d'ordre.
Point of order. Specifically, some people have taken the floor 2 or 3 times, so I just want to make sure that the order is correct.
Madam Goodrow, I have done my best to keep good track of everybody's hands as they've gone up, and I have had the capable help of the clerk. So thank you very much for raising that point of order. I'm pretty sure we've got it handled.
Well, possibly it's her attempt to be fair, though the Liberals are filibustering, and it's blatantly obvious what they're doing. Every time they come speak, there's 3 seconds between words, they stutter. It's just unbelievable. And to just allow to see their hands, I just wouldn't see them. Because you know what they're doing, so they're playing political games, so you have to play them back. And that's just my opinion. Easter, yesterday, on the Finance Committee, did an outstanding job, and he was a Liberal. Surprise, surprise.
The Liberal members of the committee made, but in doing so, we'd certainly need to clear our calendars for the weekend, which I'm prepared to do. I'm not sure if that's the hard ball that Mr. Fergus was promising that they would play if we pursued this motion. With respect to the Conservative members on this committee, there was an inference that they were not in compliance with the conflict of interest code for members with respect to filing their disclosures. As is reported on that website by the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, Madam Chair, all members are completing the process as required. 2 members' results have been published, and 1 result is waiting, being published by the Commissioner's office. And if anyone is so curious as to know who I have the privilege of co-owning my house with, which financial institution, they're welcome to take a peek. And that's the case for the Conservative members. So I'm not sure if that was the hard ball that we were promised, but also apples and oranges. We're not talking about the Conflict of Interest Code for members. We're talking about the Conflict of Interest Act. And so these are different. And I'm also not going to give a lecture to the members today about that. And I'm not going to read them sections of the criminal code that may have been violated by Justin Trudeau. I'm not going to reread the Trudeau Report 1 into the record. I'm not going to reread the Trudeau Report 2 into the record. These were the findings where Justin Trudeau had broken that law, the Conflict of Interest Act, earning the distinction being the first Prime Minister in Canada to have been found guilty of that. And he's in the company of his Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, who broke that law, the Conflict of Interest Act, and is now under investigation again. We're here to talk about this first motion, and I heard from multiple members about how it would be inappropriate to call members of family members of an elected official to this committee, and that was, again, it was inferred that that's what was on offer here. Absolutely not. I'll tell you, the only member of the Trudeau family that I want to see at this committee is Justin. If he wants to come to this committee, that would satisfy me to no end. But that's not consistent with the behavior of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He obstructed the Ethics Commissioner's investigation in the SNC Lavalin scandal. That is a fact. That is a matter of public record. It is in the Trudeau report too. He invoked cabinet confidence, which we heard from Minister Chagger in the House that was not the case when I asked her in committee 2 weeks ago. It's a fact. Did not waive cabinet confidence as promised. So that's what needs to happen here. We need the facts. And I would love to know why asking for these documents when we have this nearly $1 billion agreement. You can really call it whatever gives you comfort or whatever satisfies the Prime Minister's office in their direction to you. But it's $1 billion of taxpayers' money going to an organization with direct financial dealings with the Prime Minister's family. And I heard people talk about Stephen Harper. I know the Liberals are panicked when they start talking about Stephen Harper. And that's what's happening today. And I want to reference Prime Minister Harper, who, first of all, laid this
Point of order, Madam Chair. Can you add me on the speakers list, please?
I know the Liberals are in trouble when they start talking about Stephen Harper, who, like in a cartoon, you lay a rake on the lawn for another cartoon character to step on and it whacks them in the face. That's the Conflict of Interest Act with these Liberals. They can't help but not step on this rake. It hits them in the face over and over and over again. And Prime Minister Harper, who had the foresight to lay this out, this very transparent law for public office holders to follow, the Liberals can't help themselves but to break the law in this case. And with respect to Prime Minister Harper, I'd like to reference his decision to recuse himself from any decisions dealing with Talisman Energy. This was reported in 2012 in the Ottawa Citizen that the Prime Minister recused himself, and the reason was his brother was an employee there. And he wanted to avoid the appearance of a conflict of interest. So just we don't need to go back to Plato, and we don't need to practice our Latin to look at very recent and relevant examples of why what we're doing here is essential to preserve public confidence in our institutions. And let's look back to 2017. Justin Trudeau and the Liberal government gives more than $1 million to his friends at We, campaign contributors, the founders of that organization. They donated to his leadership. They employ members of his family. And he hands them, here's $1 million, have a July 2nd event on the stage here in Ottawa, and I'll bring my mom. Why won't they tell us if she was paid? Those are taxpayer dollars. So I'm not looking for Margaret Trudeau to come to this committee. But what we're asking for, nor am I looking for Ms. Gregoire Trudeau to come to this committee, nor am I looking for his brother Alexandre to come to this committee. But he's put them in a terrible, terrible position by not recusing himself from this decision. He apologized for it, so he recognized what he did was wrong. So now he needs to follow through and be transparent, and he needs to appear at the committees that are requesting him to come. My motion is not asking for anyone to appear at this committee. It's looking for records, documents, as reported on in media. So there's no fishing expedition or witch hunt. This is a matter of public interest, and it's a matter of preserving confidence in public institutions. The the slow roll through this meeting, and I know we're going to hear more from the government members of this committee, and that's fine. But I just wonder, what do you have to hide? Why the attempt at a cover-up? Why not just vote on the motion? Have the courage of your convictions. Don't run out the clock. Vote. If you disagree with it, we've heard from all members on your side now. We're going to hear from Mr. McKinnon in a second. I can't wait. Let's have a vote. I know there's other committee business to deal with. I look forward to seeing how you vote. But we've heard what you think. You're confused by the motion. I hope I've clarified that for you. We're not looking for these people to come to committee. There's one Trudeau that I would want to come here, and it is Justin. And I would like him to not invoke cabinet confidence. I would like him to bring all relevant documents. If someone is proposing that we bring a Trudeau here, I'm not today, but sure. If we're going to bring a member of Justin Trudeau's family, let's bring him. But if that's an amendment that the government would like to move, to have Justin Trudeau come to this committee, I will tell you now, I will vote in favor of your amendment. If you are not moving that amendment, let's talk about the motion. The motion is for these records pertaining to speaking appearances. I think that's pretty innocuous. We were going to give the organization $1 billion to hand out. They were going to benefit by $43.5 million. Nothing to hide. Let's see them. I'm not looking for their tax returns. Not looking for their pay stubs. These folks are dragged into this by virtue of the Prime Minister failing to recuse himself from these deliberations, which he admits was wrong.
Well, MP Harder made me eat my words a little bit. She pulled it through. She's allowing it going past 2 o'clock when the meeting was going to end and allowing the speakers to go. So she let the Liberals speak to be equal. So yeah, I got to eat my words. She's done a good job because she allowed this. And watch this. This is a shocker.
With my colleague who said that, well, let's depoliticize. Okay.
Chair? I'd like to put a motion on the floor.
Motion cannot be put forward during a point of order.
That we do now adjourn.
Yeah, I'm sorry. During a point of order, you cannot put a motion forward. Thank you.
But isn't this a privileged motion?
During a point of order, you cannot put that motion forward.
Okay, so I withdraw my point of order, and I am putting forward a privileged motion that we do now adjourn.
You cannot do that unless you are on the speaking list, at which point then I would call upon you, and then you could move a motion.
Okay.
Do you wish to be added to the speaking list?
Yes, please.
Okay.
So it's laid bare for everyone to see that the Liberals have attempted to filibuster this committee. Ms. Shanahan has demonstrated the Liberal cover-up. You talked the clock till 2 o'clock, and now you don't want to deal with any of this committee's business. For shame. That's politics, Mr. Scarpelagia. That's naked partisan politics. That's exactly what you said we shouldn't do here. Vote on the motion. Have the courage of your convictions. And that's not what we're seeing here. I thought we respected the committee's mandate. Is the committee's mandate not to vote on the motions put forward by the members? That's fascinating to me. So we read from procedural texts. We read historical texts. We've written new texts. So I wonder how that translates in the streets of your constituencies.
Into the middle and breaking parliamentary procedures. So thank you so much. And it's been a fascinating day. Certainly we learned a lot about Madame Barrett's long history at her college, university. We learned about ancient Athens. We went through the medieval era. So if you'll indulge me, I'll quote scripture, the book of Luke. You didn't know that I was an altar boy, did you? Well, I was. And in the book of Luke, it says that what is done in the darkness will be shouted from the rooftops, and what is whispered in the back rooms will be shown to all. And I think that this is what happens when we end up with corruption scandals and conflict of interest, is it's embarrassing for the government. I don't go back as far as Athens, but in my time in Parliament, I've seen a lot of the tawdry, slapping, rum bottle politics on the Rideau that we're famous for, all the tawdry deals. I remember I came in just after Jean Chrétien spent a couple $1 billion on golf balls. I remember Brian Mulrooney getting money in a brown paper bag and explaining that to Canadians. Bruce Carson, I've seen that one. Mike Duffy, Nigel Wright. And the work of this committee has been sometimes very raucous and very confrontational, but it is this committee that tries to establish some review of the ethical behaviors of parliamentarians. We are not a technical committee. We are a political committee, as my good friend Mr. Scarpelleggia said, and it falls to us to sometimes bring these issues into the public light. And I have been quoted extensively, so I feel I might have a life here beyond my limited career. If other people do quote me in perpetuity, it might speak for how long I've been on this committee. And the issue of the integrity of documents is something I've spoken up before, and I've spoken it up when we've had Liberals in power and Conservatives in power, and we do need to establish precedents, and I think that's really important. I think what makes this issue difficult is that we had the We Charity state publicly that no money was paid to the Trudeaus, and that was false. So the question of trusting them on this is it raises questions now that have to be answered. What were those financial relations? Because the refusal of the Prime Minister and Mr. Morneau to recuse themselves has raised ethical questions that must be answered. And we have had 2 other findings of guilt against the Prime Minister where we've tried to have the Ethics Commissioner report to our committee and we've been blocked by the government. So how do we make recommendations about how things should be done if the government refuses to let the Ethics Commissioner speak to our committee so that we can present to Parliament for a report that would suggest changes? And if we had done that on the previous 2 findings of guilt, Mr. Trudeau may not be in the situation he is now, because maybe there would have been some measures put in place. And Madame Breyer was great about talking about how we have these standards. Well, we have standards, but if those in power refuse to respect them, we have a problem. And this is why the Prime Minister is under his 3rd investigation. So we could talk all night. I've been in many long filibusters, but I am just a conflict of interest. My own family members, I should put it out in case someone finds out. I am actually trying to move one of my daughters this weekend, and that's a conflict of interest for me because I'm a lot more afraid of my wife than I am of the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, and I have to help move my daughter. So I'm trying to bring us together. So I've heard the Liberals say again and again and again that they think it's inappropriate that the financial records of the Trudeau family be brought before our committee, and they keep mentioning the Ethics Commissioner. And I certainly heard my Conservative colleagues suggest that we want to hear Justin Trudeau speak, because it's Justin Trudeau who put his family in this situation. It was his choice. And it was we's choice to start paying the Trudeau family after he became Prime Minister that put them within a very fair discussion about political influence. So I would offer a friendly amendment that we would, as in the New Democrats, support this committee calling for the records, the financial records, to be obtained from we and transferred to the Ethics Commissioner, so that, again, we're not turning this into a family circus, but we want those documents turned over. If they were turned over to the Ethics Commissioner, if the Liberals supported that, then that would back up everything they said for the last 3 hours, excluding all the stuff they said about medieval kings and princes and ancient Athens and all the other stuff. But the gist of it was they kept saying, trust the Ethics Commissioner. We would put that forward in a friendly amendment if we could say that we call on Justin Trudeau to explain his role in this and the decisions he made, because the Liberals have said again and again and again that it's not fair to draw on the family members, it's the office holders. So the public office holder, if Mr. Trudeau agrees to come here, we would agree to transfer the documents, the financial documents of the Trudeau family and the We Corporation to the ethics commissioner. So he gets to decide what's going to be released or not released, and we get to hear from the public office holder. So I would make that as a friendly amendment if my colleagues are interested, and then we could vote on this, and then we could go home and I could go move my daughter and not be in serious conflict with my family. But other than that, I'm willing to stay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. I just want to be clear here then. Are you moving an amendment to this motion right now?
Yes, I am.
Then would...
Well, again, I like being wrong. So Angus has put forward a motion, and MP Harder has taken it up, and they're going to vote on it. And we'll see how that goes. And again, she's done an outstanding job. At first, I was lost, but good job.